Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and today we are wading, kind of, to bookish online discourse. If you've been around the booktube community, the bookternet, recently, you may have come across some discussions on queer men and how they're not exactly fronting their own stories when it comes to books. A lot of MLM media or media with queer men tends to be more popular when it's written by women or non-binary authors. And in fact, there are straight women who make entire careers out of writing only MLM stories. And we can get into this. It becomes a whole thing. Well, why are you trying to limit people? Can't anyone write whatever they want? Yes, but the amount that queer men get shoved to the side in their own stories is not good. It's not good. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole about how talking about a lot of these female authors seem to think that focusing on MLM somehow takes care of the misogyny that would be in the story otherwise. It doesn't. Or they think it's somehow more okay for a queer man to go through the traumatic things they're putting their characters through. It's not. But we're going to go a little bit happier side today because I do not get angry and participate in discourse on the angry side a lot. What I prefer to do when things start happening like that is I get on Twitter and I purposely start to uplift whoever it is that's the discourse is around, usually a marginalized group. And today I'm going to do what I would usually do on Twitter, but in a booktube video. So rather than do an entire rant video about how horrible all of this is and how queer men are pushed to the side in ways that would be blatantly obvious and wrong in other marginalizations, we're instead just going to focus on some fun MLM stories that are in fact written by queer men. Now, because that is the parameter I'm going with, I stuck only with authors that I knew for a fact leaned mostly into masculine. So if, for example, I saw an author whose work I read and loved, but they went by he, they pronouns, and their bios online were almost all written with the they pronoun, I decided to hedge my bets and save them for a later non-binary author list that I will inevitably make down the line. Today, we are focusing purely on men, or those who are definitively in the camp of masc. That sounds like a really weird book. Who have written books that either have an Achillean romance or otherwise queer, male, or masc-defined characters. So, I loved Felix Ever After. I loved Cemetery Boys. But as those authors seem to me, as far as I can tell, lean more non-binary, we're going to save them for another list. Now, with all that said, let's jump in. Up first is Too Like the Lightning by Travis Bedoin. Travis is like my fairy gay mother when it comes to learning more about MLM written by queer men, because I stumbled across one of his works on Twitter a while back and we started messaging each other. And when I mentioned that I didn't have a lot of recommendations or have a lot of basis for MLM books written by actual queer men, because like I said, they're not as prevalent in the story space, he gave me a list of like 16 names, and that became the basis for so many of the connections I've made since then. A lot of my work with this little micro community on Twitter is the result of him. So obviously I couldn't not pick his book for this list. Not only because of that, but because I loved the short story collection and I had been basically begging him for a full MLM novel. So this is a very summary contemporary romance all about a professor that has just been let go from his position and decides to go off to this little summer house, or I guess basically a cabin in the southern heat, to work on writing his book and essentially trying to reestablish his life. And there he meets a handsome landscaper named Coley. This is a little bit of an age gap romance, not too much of one. Andrew, I believe, is early to mid 30s. Coley is early to mid 20s. And right away, the book, I think I said in the review that the landscape was a character in itself. and I'm upgrading that. The landscape's the main character because this book is so placey and so summary and so highly descriptive of the environs around the house. It does read at times like a stage play, which makes sense because from what I can tell of the author's work, he's very invested in English classes, as both of his protagonists of his works so far are English professors that ironically both love to be bottoms for shorter men. Don't ask me why. But anyway, so the environs of this place are very much its own character, and the romance definitely has that, oh, they think it's only for the summer, but could there be more? And does Andrew really want to go back to the stuffy professor life he had before? And is Coley really just the kind of blue-collar kid almost that he seems? And of course, there's a ton of sex scenes. I didn't have as many fluids this time around, and that's been a joke between Travis and I for forever. I kept joking about how many references to fluids his short story collection made, and so I think he dialed it back maybe for my sake. Thank you, Travis. But this is a great pick for summer. This is a great pick for a very sweet romance. It's queer norm enough. Things like homophobia might be like mentioned in passing, but it's not a main focal point. So if you need that escapism, you still have it. You have the fun female best friend, which I always love seeing popping up in MLM works. And in general, just a really sweet story, a very realistic depiction of what the real conflicts would be in this kind of relationship, but with an adorable ending. Up next is Siren's Debt by Richard Amos. This is about a siren man who is the last of his kind. All the other sirens have been basically hunted to near extinction. And so what do you do in that instance? You become a famous pop star. And I loved that difference where he's like, not only am I not gonna hide from you guys, I'm gonna flaunt it in your face that I'm still alive. And he is that level of sassy. Dylan is just slightly stereotypical for a gay man at first, but of course the nuance comes as the story progresses, and you see what the book's marketing describes as a why choose slow burn, aka he has multiple characters that he is having like casual sexual relations with over the course of the story, because as a siren, like, sex literally can help like rejuvenate him, and I guess the idea is that it'll turn into like a poly thing. It's still casual in this first book, and I haven't gotten too far into the series yet, but a lot of it is him trying to navigate being a pop star on top of, you know, still having people that are trying to kill him to make sure sirens are all extinct, and also he's carrying a very heavy burden of, I won't spoil anything, but there are reasons why he believes that he's kind of partially responsible for the downfall of his entire species. And in general, I also liked the idea of the siren being a male character, because in most cases, sirens and mermaids and all that kind of aquatic species in any kind of fantasy fiction tends to be female. So showing some more male in this area is really good. I've also read more from this author that I also loved. But we're only going to stick with one author for every entry in here, because one or two of these authors could just take over the entire thing. So let's move on to the next one. Up next is The Extraordinaries by T.J. Klune. See? I can read traditionally published books, but regardless, this is a kind of rom-com taking place in a world with superheroes, but definitely from a teenage perspective. Our main character, Nick, has ADHD and is a gigantic fanboy for the resident superheroes, in that the book actually starts with the fanfiction he wrote with himself as the self-insert boyfriend character of one of these superheroes, and it's great. And as things progress, it's really kind of funny, because it definitely does show his ADHD in the writing style, but also it becomes so painfully obvious, even from the reader's standpoint, where they're reading from his point of view, that his best friend Seth is just in love with him, is just the most in love with him. And like, they're in their little friend group, there's also this sapphic couple, and everyone's like constantly dropping hints about it, and Nick's just like, nothing sticks. And I loved that. I loved the more lighthearted take on superheroes, but it still has a lot of the kind of superhero tropes. That one intrepid female reporter that is rumored to be, linked with one of them, and that kind of stuff, and big reveals about who the actual real identities of the superheroes / supervillains are. Like, that one actually got me. I thought I had it figured out. I did not. I actually really liked that part. And then, of course, there are some giant climactic scenes at the end, and some things that I think I figured out reveal-wise moving forward. It is a series, and if you're looking for a more lighthearted YA romance with some fun speculative sci-fi-ness, I would highly suggest this one. Up next is The Orchid and the Lion by Gabriel Hargrave. This is a sci-fi space opera type focused on sex workers in this brothel on a space station. And this book is lovingly slotted into the series I like to call The Gay Nerds Are Not Okay, because this one is dealing very directly, very pointedly with space homophobes. Well, there are homophobes in other places too, but this one is specifically dealing with the ones in space. So you have Dorian, who has just been instructed to help instruct this new hire at the brothel, Leith, with basically getting his feet under him and learning how to be a sex worker in space. And it happens as they're doing this that things politically are starting to ramp up, and this councilwoman who basically has it out for the brothel is starting to gain a lot more power. And the book talks about how things on Earth are really not going well either. A lot of things have reverted and gone back to a lot more fascist-like bigoted laws. So it's not the easiest of reads, but I loved the character of Dorian. He is femme, but definitely still identifies as a man, but has like all the long wigs and dresses, and probably dresses better than I ever will. Leith is a trans man, and this book is written by a trans man, so you have some extra added layers of representation there, which is really cool, because the fact that it is an erotica, it has sex scenes, it gets into a lot of like the culture around being a trans person and sex, but very respectfully, obviously, because it's, a representation from someone living that lifestyle. And it is, again, the beginning of a series. Most of these are, honestly. You definitely got to be prepared for it. Like I mentioned before, it's dark, it's heavy, but it is very sex positive. It's sex worker positive. It's definitely a more nuanced take of polyamory than I've seen in a lot of romances, because it is not specifically group love. It is more of the paramour, metamor setup, especially moving forward. Eventually, I do intend to continue to review it, but this is one of those books where you need to be in a good headspace, because you are going to be forced to think about all of the bigoted laws we already have in place in the real world, so it's not exactly escapism, but it is a very good book. Up next is Drag Queens, Emo Teens, and Big Dreams by Dylan James. This is a YA contemporary. There is a romance, but it is more of an already established relationship, and the crux of the story is basically an unwitting coming out. Now, our main character, Corbin, has known he's gay for a while, has had a boyfriend for a while, said emo teen of the title, and also he is a drag queen, has just begun, finds out that he has a lot of talent for it, but he discovers at one of the drag shows that his older brother is in the audience. His older brother is a Marine, like their father wants all of his sons to be, because he is very alpha male, and Corbin promptly begins freaking out that his dad is going to find out. So it is not a full, it's weird to say non-con coming out story, but it's that kind of idea of he did not necessarily make the big decision to come out. And if you are someone that's had a fraught relationship with your own coming out story, this low-key reads like psychological thriller, because I was like high-key anxiety the entire time, because it's the whole fear of, is the older brother going to tell their father? What's their father going to think? And there's also, in this instance, a side character that is also a queer teenage boy who's also in the same coming out process, and it basically runs the gambit of different reactions that people within the community can get when this kind of thing eventually comes out. And I really, really liked how realistic this one felt, because I feel like in a lot of times the coming out stories are trying so desperately to be pure escapism that it leans so much into the everything is so perfectly fine that it almost makes the main character look stupid for not coming out. And also kind of just the thing where it's like you have every indication that the parents are going to be horrible bigots, and then the person comes out and suddenly, oh no, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't happen that quickly. It's not magically, oh, well, now that they know there's a gay person in their house, they're totally fine with it now. And this one managed to balance the line between being too fluffy so as to not really reflect that kind of story in real life versus being so depressing that it brings the whole thing down. There are genuine bumps that the family has to iron out and go through within the process, and I really appreciated that, and I liked all that nuance. It was just anxiety inducing at the time, but I would still suggest it. Up next is Hematoma by Matteo Polk. This is not a romance. It might look like a romance based on the synopsis. This is all about Shay, a young man who really, really likes pain as part of the pleasure process, and discovers a tattoo artist named Ricky who is all too happy to help him with it. And turns out that Ricky is a vampire. And that might sound like the beginning of a paranormal romance. It's not. This is a very dark interpretation of a twisted, abusive relationship. Basically, what would happen if a human was caught up in a relationship with a vampire that wasn't all too nice to him. And it gets very dark and goes a lot of dark places. But I do like this one for how it shows probably what a relationship with an actual vampire would look like if that vampire had that kind of classic immortal, like how vampires would really have different morality than humans just based on how long they live, and how vampires who can charm and all that kind of stuff probably would be used to getting their way. So it's almost like a more realistic interpretation of what a creature like a vampire would be in that kind of romance that they're often put in with humans. But in general, it's very dark. It goes a lot of places. It gets gory at times. There are very graphic sex scenes, but it is very powerful and impactful in the way that it shows how the abusive relationship happens, because you see the entire thing from beginning to end. So you see how at the beginning it looks fine and it looks like your normal paranormal romance story. And the author knows that I spoke about it like this in the review. This is not a romance. Do not go in expecting a happy ending. Do not go in expecting that everything is going to be okay. Be prepared for the trigger warning stuff. I believe that those are listed in the book's marketing. But in general, really, really impactful, just not at all lighthearted. And last but not least, we have Chasing Ghosts by Dean Cole. This is less an out-and-out queer romance and more a paranormal mystery with a queer protagonist, though his sexuality does come up. Quentin Strange has recently gotten a job as a photographer and is paired up with this journalist named Kat, and they must go to this creepy old house to follow around this ghost hunting group. There's a variety of people, the ghost hunting group specifically, and then a couple of other characters, and of course they're going around this big old house, and strange things begin to happen. And so the whole thing is it real? Is it a prank? Why is everyone else here? And there is a novelist at this little gathering that Quentin has a meet cute with, and like things might be happening. It's definitely a slow burn, but without giving too much away, Quentin is haunted by a previous relationship that ended very tragically, and it's a whole thing that drives him, and there's a giant cathartic moment near the end with it that almost got me to actually tear up, which is very rare for me. And I really liked that aspect of it, that the sexuality could come into it without being an out-and-out romance just for that sake. Although I ship them like hard, but I'm willing to wait. Regardless, I love the relationship between Quentin and Kat, how she is not trying to get with him, but nor do they hate each other like it's an actual I take that back. They kind of hate each other at the beginning, but it's more like the arc of their friendship than like the standout characteristic of their friendship. They grow to work better together, and I really like that. And I'm really waiting for the next one. It's been a hot minute, but like Mr. Cole, whenever you have that sequel ready, I'm here. And that is it for this list. A lot of these authors have written other awesome books that I would highly suggest you check out, but in general, it can be kind of tricky in this day and age to find a lot of MLM books written just by queer men, or even just MLM books written by queer people. However, they are out there, and once you can get into the community, you can find a ton of new books. Like, I am just swimming in books. The other day, I was just like, hey, does anybody have like any recommendations for polyam books where there's more than one woman in the polycule? And I woke up to like 18 notifications. So it might be tricky, but finding queer books is possible. And yes, if you want that polyam rec book list, I could give it, but it's going to take a hot minute because I have to actually read the books. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.